Hey guys, first regardsman here, and so I'll be talking about the Vanguard class in Space Marine 2 and everything you need to know about his strengths, weaknesses, and gameplay loop so that by the end of this video, you will better understand the class whether you are a brand new player or a veteran in the game. In Warhammer 40k lore, a Vanguard infiltrator is a specialized battle line member of a Primaris squad, prioritizing burst fire close range weaponry like bolt carbines, and they are usually used for sabotage and scrambling enemy communications. One of the biggest things separating a Vanguard from a standard battle line Primaris Marine is their use of the light armor Phobos variant of the Mark X power armor, which aids in their fast movement across the battlefield. And in Space Marine 2, this armor is actually represented by them having only 2 armor as opposed to the 3 on other classes. The Vanguard is also a melee-focused hybrid class that specializes in both team support and sustained self-healing, with access to some of the stronger bolters and melee weaponry in the game, alongside a ton of damage reduction perks for both melee and ranged damage that make you significantly tankier than you might think initially. And all of your sustain is made even easier with the Vanguard starting perk that gives you a 50% increase to your contested health recovery. Now, even though the in-game starting perk description says contested health regenerates 50% faster, this perk's contested health recovery only applies to melee weapons, not ranged. And even if that is worse than it may sound initially, this actually pairs very well with things like the chainsword that already have perks that double your contested health recovery, or weapons like the combat knife that usually lack significant health recovery at all, making the Vanguard one of the easiest classes to manage Minor's swarms with. And this brings us to the signature class ability of the Vanguard, which is of course the grapnel launcher. The grapnel launcher is the main mobility tool of the Vanguard, and upon use it will take you directly to a single enemy, where you will perform a diving kick in their face, staggering and damaging them, which will allow you to perform a follow-up attack for either melee or range. The actual damage of your diving kick will scale up with difficulty and can be even further increased with perks like collateral damage or tenacity that can actually let you one-shot Majoris and immediately put them to execute, or deal significant damage to things like a Neurothrope boss. And upon using your grapnel launcher, the Vanguard actually becomes completely invulnerable to damage the entire duration of the animation, so it's actually a very useful tool for both engaging and disengaging, since it lets you escape some of the most obnoxious area hazards in the game. The grapnel launcher can also hold a maximum of 2 charges, similar to the Assault's jump pack, with a cooldown of around 45 seconds per charge. But this also brings me to the most controversial portion of the grapnel launcher, which is the target priority and the distance requirement. Now, the grapnel launcher has a 10-meter distance requirement from a given enemy to actually be able to target them, which kind of leads to an awkward gameplay loop where you grapple into one guy and then have to back away to grapple again into the same horde. This also makes the power axe one of the best weapons on this class, since the power backstep actually moves you away from your target in melee, allowing you to grapple back in for damage or trigger perk effects like tactical prowess. Now, the grapnel targeting is one of the biggest complaints about the class. It is affected by multiple factors and primarily likes to prioritize ranged enemies, since back in the day, Space Marine 2's launch had dramatically smaller hordes, so the grapnel launcher was significantly less clunky back then due to enemy density. But these days, you have to keep a few things in mind for general gameplay with the grapnel targeting. First is that your field of view will affect your targeting, and aiming down your weapon sights to aim your grapnel can be an effective way of more accurately selecting an enemy. Now, while PC players can manually edit FOV in the game settings, unfortunately the console version of Space Marine 2 does not have an FOV slider at the moment, and Focus has said they have no intention of releasing one on the platform anytime soon, which is probably due to performance issues like a lot of games, but just keep that in mind. But aiming your gun will work on both platforms to help your grapnel targeting, and the grapnel launcher also loves to prioritize ranged enemies, so keep that in mind as well. And even if you do try your hardest with every single trick you can find to help you choose a target for your class ability, you will still just get flung to enemies you don't want to sometimes, because Space Marine 2 is a hectic game, and even veteran players struggle with the grapnel targeting in some circumstances because it's honestly a bit clunky at the moment, so don't feel too bad if you sometimes waste your class ability. Now, Focus has said the Vanguard will be getting some gameplay changes in patch 13 to make his overall playstyle a bit smoother, similar to the Assault in patch 12. This might give him an animation cancel or a shorter grapnel range, and I'll put any future changes like this in the pinned comment below. But this brings me to the Vanguard's weapon selection. The biggest thing that separates the Vanguard class from the 2 melee classes, Bulwark and Assault, is that you actually have a primary ranged weapon on this one. There is a heavy emphasis here on bolt carbine options like the Oculus, Instigator, and standardized version. We also get access to the Melter Rifle, which is one of his overall strongest options. Since the Vanguard class not only benefits from close range combat weaponry like this thanks to the grapnel launcher, but also gives you an extra source of both armor regen and healing with weapon perks like Trick Shot and Rapid Health, on top of partially solving some of Vanguard's major ammo economy problems thanks to weapon perks like Decisive Reload. The Vanguard also has access to every secondary weapon in the game outside the plasma pistol, alongside the chainsword, combat knife, and power axe for his melee selection, with the power axe currently being the best option for the reasons I previously mentioned, thanks to its power backstep mechanic, which will conveniently move you away from targets to grapple back to them, all while dealing damage from the power wave itself and Gunstrike to let you hit breakpoints for perks like Tactical Prowess. The major downside of the Vanguard is that you have a pretty terrible ammo economy, and even though you have a ton of healing, he very much lacks in melee damage compared to the Bulwark and Assault, and even the Sniper that all reach significantly higher amounts than he is capable of currently, and your boss damage especially is just not remotely as strong as what other classes are capable of, and he is firmly in the bottom tier of options when it comes to this at the moment. Part of this is because his melee perks don't function properly and give significantly less damage you might expect if you simply read the perk description, and when it comes to mass horde clear, he is heavily dependent on his signature perk combos Zone of Impact and Tactical Prowess, or recycling Melt-A-Bombs with perks like Consecutive Execution. Now, none of this is to say the Vanguard is weak, and even if he is currently considered the weakest class in Space Marine 2, that does not mean he is a bad class, because he can absolutely clear the hardest content in the game and get you all the unlocks and heroic weapons you'd ever want. It's simply that his upsides of healing are also found on classes like Bulwark that simultaneously overperform in damage compared to him as well. Now, when it comes to playing Vanguard, the most popular setups for him almost always include one of his 2 healing perks of either Unmatched Zeal, which will give you and your teammates a 30% health restoration after an extremist melee kill, or your signature perk Adrenaline Rush, which will give the Vanguard 5% health restoration on a melee kill of Majoris or above. And keep in mind, when it says melee kill, this also counts for melee executes, so you don't simply have to physically kill them with your weapon every single time. Now, one more thing I want to mention when it comes to this class is surrounding your Tactical Prowess signature perk. This one lets you execute an enemy at 33% HP or below, and can be simultaneously triggered with the Zone of Impact perk for dramatic AoE damage looping. But the best way to tell an enemy is below 33% HP is by using the game's targeting function, which most people actually don't know exists in the game currently, and this will show a triangle on the enemy representing their health in 3 sections, and when it shows red, they are at 33% HP, but keep in mind they have to be below 33% HP for Tactical Prowess to actually trigger, so if you're not sure, you can just shoot them again. Another way to tell is if they start glowing red, and that means they are around 25% HP or below. It is not exactly the most intuitive system ever, but it's also the best option we've got currently. And general gameplay tips for the Vanguard is that while you do have a ton of sustained healing, you don't have on-command heals like the Bulwark class does in the Invigorating Icon, where you can choose when he wants to go back to full health almost instantaneously, and the Vanguard's heals are far more gradual, even with the burst healing of Unmatched Zeal, which scales up significantly in Siege mode and higher difficulty operations, since you find way more extremists there compared to other modes. But that is the general overview of the Vanguard class, which brings me to the next portion of this guide, which is the perk tree breakdown. Alright, here we are at the Vanguard perk tree. Now, the Vanguard has a ton of good perks and a ton of terrible perks as well, so I'm going through all of them here today and just give you my opinion on them and which ones I think are worth your time and which ones are kind of trash. Now, number 1, we have the perk here, Moving Target. Killing an enemy from a distance of more than 30 meters restores ability charge by 10%. This one sounds better than it actually is. A 30-meter distance requirement in this game for a perk trigger is actually pretty trash, and usually the Vanguard is in close range anyways, which is why you have perks down here like Battlefield Awareness for 8-meter distance requirements in the first place, and usually you will only be triggering this on things like Hormigons, Termagants, or Cultists on Chaos, and the idea behind this perk is to give you your ability charge back to grapnel onto the target, but that kind of sucks because usually you don't actually get the full benefit from this perk. Next perk here is a Melee Mastery. Melee damage increases by 10% against Majoris and higher enemies. This perk is way worse than it sounds initially because at the moment in patch 12 there is a bug where you don't actually get the full damage buff from this. It's not a multiplicative perk like the one in the Sniper is, and unfortunately for that reason the buff here is not as substantial as it should be. It's not like god awful, like you can definitely take it. A 10% buff is still not terrible here, it's just not as strong as it sounds initially. Next perk here is Upper Hand. After a perfect time parry, block, or dodge, you do not lose control of heavy hits and you cannot be knocked back for 10 seconds. Now, no knockback effects in Space Marine 2 are incredible, but especially for melee classes because usually they are the most at risk of being stunlocked in the first place because they're in the melee combat anyways, so you definitely want to grab this one. I think of this column, this is by far the best option and usually the one you'll take on most top tier builds. Next perk here is Duelist. This perk is pretty good if you're new to the game. This perk can be pretty helpful if you're new to the game or you play on high ping because sometimes the input delay on those higher pings can be circumvented by this option. But the big problem I have with this perk is it teaches you bad habits because if you get used to playing with a 50% increased parry window, going back to a normal one with other perks can be a bit harder, so just keep that in mind. Next perk here is Close Combat Focus. You take 20% less range damage. Now, range damage reduction in Space Marine 2 is pretty strong. It will affect both your armor and HP, and the Vanguard class does have a ton of armor regen with perks like Restoration and Launch Restoration down here, but the big thing about this column is that you don't really need this one as much because you have the better perk down here, Conviction. When your armor is fully depleted, you'll take 25% less health damage for 10 seconds. Now, a 25% health damage reduction in this game is very strong for all damage, to help out range damage and melee hits, and also breaking your armor every 10 seconds is very easy to trigger and like cycle back into because, like I said before, you do have Launch Restoration and Restoration down here that both give you armor regen. So definitely the best option overall, but Close Combat Focus is not a bad option either, and Duelists can help out newer players. The next perk here is called Retribution. When your ranged weapons magazine is empty, melee damage increases by 30%. Now, this perk sounds way better than it is initially, mainly because the 30% melee damage buff here is not 30% of your relic tier weapon, it is far closer to 30% of your standard issue tier weapon here, so just keep that in mind. This is still a melee damage increase, but it's the exact same perk effect as the improved melee perk on the Inferno pistol, and because of that, it's not very strong here, it's not very strong there either. It's a huge perk investment for like not as much damage as you might think initially, but the big thing is if you're going for full melee, it's still pretty good for that. Like, you know, melee damage is melee damage, it's just not as good as it sounds initially. Next perk here is Consecutive Execution. Killing 7 enemies in a rapid succession restores equipment charged by 1. The cooldown is 90 seconds. This is the best perk in this column by far. A 90-second Melt-A-Bomb, Shocknade, Crack, Frag, these will solve games all on their own. Equipment in Space Marine 2 is incredible, and in patch 13, there's like an Incendiary Grenade coming alongside other previous added equipment like Sanctified Wrath Reliquaries, and really the better equipment we get in the game, the better these perks are going to get as well. And also, Melt-A-Bombs are already top tier options anyways. A 90-second cooldown is really not that long at all, so definitely a top tier pick. Next perk here is Honed Reactions. When your health's less than 50%, your perfect dodge window is doubled. Now, this can actually give you the highest perfect dodge window in the entire game, and usually the way this works is that you'll drop below 50% and either stay there, or you'll get like a gun strike off of this perk trigger and immediately use that gun strike to get your CHP back, because this will trigger when your CHP is still active. So if your HP drops for any reason below 50%, you'll still get this off and have the opportunity to get it back. So pretty good option there, and also pairs very well with perks over here like Thrill of the Fight that give you a 20% health damage reduction on a perfect dodge. So pretty good option. Next perk here is a Melee Champion. All team members deal 15% more melee damage. Just like the perk over here, Retribution, this one's damage calculation is pretty trash. Hopefully they fix that in the future. If they have, I will put it in a pinned comment. But for now, the Melee Champion perk is by far the worst team perk because the 15% buff here is just not very good at all. But you know, damage is damage. So if you're going for like a full melee build, this is still technically the best option. Next perk here is Unmasked Zeal. Melee finishers of Extremis or Terminus level enemies additionally restore health by 30% for any team member. I would say for the most part and most players, this is by far the best team perk on Vanguard. Getting a full med pack on every single Extremis and Terminus is incredible for your teammates, especially in Siege mode where there are just so many more Extremis and the higher difficulties like Absolute or Hard strats. So, you know, if you're a new player, definitely grab this one, though I do kind of prefer the perk down here, Inner Fire. All team members can restore ability charge by 15% by performing finishers on Majoris or higher enemies, because if you are getting a better CDR on your grapnel, you can get more triggers off of things like Launch Restoration to get armor back, and on top of that, getting a 15% cooldown reduction every single time you get a finisher on Majoris or higher for classes like Bulwark that have a very long cooldown their chapter banner is super invaluable, and also really just any class in the game. So really god tier perk, and both of these are very strong options. Next perk here is Restless Fortitude. After a diving kick, you take 40% less range damage for 10 seconds. This is a substantial damage reduction for your diving kick. Usually you go into like a Rubik Marine or something and get a fat damage reduction here, and 40%, that is high. This will stack with things like Conviction. It will make your life way easier on Chaos, and this is usually what I take for like an easier build. Next perk here is Shockwave. Diving kick additionally deals damage in a 5-meter radius. This is pretty nice for wiping out things like Bramble, Cultist, or just like knocking away Hormagaunts or Spore Mines, but for the most part, I do kind of prefer Restless Fortitude, but still a very strong option. Next perk here is collateral damage. Diving kick deals 50% more damage and additionally damages enemies on the way to the grapnel launcher's target. Now, this one used to completely suck ass. These days, it's okay because the grapnel launcher damage does scale with the difficulty of your game. But that being said, I do think these two are still a bit better. But you know, damage is damage, and like sometimes it's pretty fun. Next perk here is Zone of Impact. Performing a finisher with the grapnel launcher deals damage to nearby enemies. This perk is incredible. The amount of damage you do on the AoE from this thing is tremendous. One of the best perks in the whole game for Vanguard, and by far one of his best perk combos, if not the single best perk combo for him in the entire game, with Zone of Impact and Tactical Prowess I'll get into later. So definitely pick this up for that build, and really, really strong option. Next perk here is Tenacity. After a ranged kill of a Majoris or higher enemy, Diving Kick's damage increases by 130%, and the cooldown is 15 seconds. Now, I like this perk. It's pretty fun. It is not remotely as good as Zone of Impact, but you know, Diving Kick damage is pretty entertaining. If you combine this, with the perk down here, Collateral Damage, that's a pretty fat, chunky damage increase to your Diving Kick and super fun to use. So for that reason, if you want to use this one, you definitely can. It definitely works out, but Zone of Impact is definitely better. Next perk here is Tip of the Spear. Enemies hit by Diving Kick take 15% more range damage for 10 seconds. This will apply a debuff to the enemy for your entire team. It's okay. Like, Tip of the Spear is kind of fallen off. It definitely needs a buff in my opinion. If you want to take this for like a bulk carbine build, that is a pretty substantial thing, because it usually it's like grapnel onto the target, immediately fire your fully automatic gun into their mouth, and just get like that free damage buff. So a really strong option there. Next perk here is Soul of the Fight. After a perfect time parry, block, or dodge, you take 20% health damage reduction for 5 seconds. You know, this is a perk that will re-trigger every single time you proc the effect, and this procs on every single defensive trigger in the entire game, so really good for that. A 20% health damage reduction on top of Conviction is a 45% health damage reduction, which is really strong on this class. If you take both of these perks on top of Restless Fortitude, you're actually pretty damn tanky on the Vanguard class. A really underrated combo. So if you want to do that, you definitely can. A 5-second uptime is way longer than it sounds initially. Next perk here is Grim Determination. When grapnel launcher is in cooldown, weapon damage increases by 15%. This perk is okay. The big issue I have with this one is that Grim Determination requires you to have a fully drained grapnel launcher. You can't simply have one charge out of 2, and for that reason, I usually skip over it. Next perk here is Combat Readiness. Grapnel launcher recharges 20% faster. This is a very strong option with non-inner fire builds, because sometimes you just need that extra grapnel a bit faster, and more grapnels means more armor, and also means more executes a Zone of Impact. So for that reason, it is a very powerful option, though so is Thrill of the Fight. And those are pretty much all the gear tree options. Next perk here is Tactical Prowess. Grapnel launcher can activate a finisher not only on incapacitated enemies, but also on those who have less than 33% health except Terminus level, and performing a finisher with the grapnel launcher restores its charge. This is like the premier combo. It gives you so many free breakpoints in this game for Zone of Impact, and also it gives you free AoE triggers over and over, and also the execute of this perk will trigger the perk effect for Restless Fortitude to give you a 40% range damage reduction. So a really good option overall, and by far the best perk combo for this class is Impact. So if you want to use that, you definitely can. Just keep in mind, sometimes this perk effect will bug out. It will not give you the execute, and you'll just be sitting there and being shot at. So be careful of that. The next perk here is Emperor's Blessing. Taking lethal damage restores all armor instead of incapacitating you. Cooldown is 120 seconds. This is just a no-die perk for every 120 seconds. It's okay. I don't think it's like a super strong option if you're just starting out and you don't have like full confidence of things like Tactical Prowess and Zone of Impact. You could pick this up. I mean, not dying is pretty good, but I'll say once you get better at the game, this one's a weaker option. Next perk here is Adrenaline Rush. Melee kills of Majoris or higher enemies restore health by 5%. Now, way back in the day, this was a 10% health restore. They nerfed that to 5, and it's still a pretty strong option. Like, I do think if you're going for a healing perk on this class, Unmasked Heal is definitely a better option, but you know, you can combine both of them for like a 35% health restore, which is quite strong, but for the most part, this one's fallen off a little bit compared to Tactical Prowess, so for that reason, you still pick up this combo. That's pretty much all there is for the Vanguard perk tree. Now for the Vanguard class and his prestige perk options, he does have a ton of very powerful perk effects, but they're also kind of like no-brainer pickups that you pretty much always take, which is like my major issue with a lot of the prestige perk trees in this game. But that being said, I will be talking about all of them here today, starting off with Battlefield Awareness.
If a target is within 8 meters, you will deal 10% more range damage. This perk has incredible synergy on the Vanguard class because number one, you have a grapnel launcher, so being within 8 meters of an enemy happens all the time, and you also have a ton of close range weapons, stuff like the Melter Rifle, Heroic Instigator Carbine, or the Bolt Carbine automatic variant. All of these benefit from being within 10 meters or 8 meters of an enemy all the time, so definitely pick that one up if you're using any of those guns, and really, I pick this one up all the time pretty much on every build. Next perk here is Exigency Charge. When your health less than 25%, ability charge regenerates 15% faster. This perk is still garbage on Vanguard, just like Tactical in my opinion. Being below 25% health in this game kind of sucks, and a 15% faster ability charge for that is not really worth it at all. And on top of that, if you are running a Melter Rifle and you have the perk Rapid Health, you will usually go back up above 25% HP off of like a single Hormagon swarm, so a really bad synergy there as well. Definitely would not suggest picking this one up. Next perk here is Indomitable Spirit. While performing a gun strike, you don't lose control from heavy hits, and you cannot be knocked back. This is a really nice perk to have if you are not taking upper hand for whatever reason. If you are taking upper hand, this one is a bit redundant because this will give you no knockback on every parry, block, or dodge for 10 seconds. So you really don't need that because that will also affect your gun strike. But Indomitable Spirit is pretty good if you're taking perks like Melee Mastery or Moving Target. Next perk here is Fortitude. Health increases by 15%. Just like every class before him, Fortitude is a top tier perk effect. Having HP increases in Space Marine 2 is just a tremendously potent perk, so pretty much always pick this up on every build. I would never go without this. Next perk here is Launch Restoration. Using the grapple launcher restores one armor segment. This perk is incredible. Armor in Space Marine 2 on a drip feed is a top tier effect because any amount of armor remaining in Space Marine 2 will reduce all incoming melee damage to 0 even from bosses, so having this back on every single grapnel is incredible. It will also trigger off of perks like Tactical Prowess on the execute below a 33% HP threshold, and you'll also be able to get back a ton of armor if you take stuff like Combat Readiness on top of Inner Fire, so a really good synergy with him, one of the best perks in this entire tree. Next perk here is Restoration. Killing 7 enemies rapid succession restores an armor segment. Cooldown is 15 seconds. Being able to get armor back on a drip feed, like I said before, is incredible in this game. This is not quite as good as Launch Restoration in my opinion because grapnel launchers just happen all the time. You know, if you're using things like a Melt-A-Bomb, if you're using things like a Shock Nade, this will trigger throughout your game consistently. I usually pick these both up together because more armor is usually best, but you know, if you want to skip this one and take like Indomitable Spirit, you could do that. Final perk here is Well Equipped. Equipment damage increases by 20%. I usually skip over this one because the only real breakpoint you hit on this perk is against enemies like the Sorcerers on hard strats. You'll be able to one-shot them off a crack grenade with this perk effect, but beyond that, Melt-A-Bomb's already like super potent on their own. Shock nades and frags don't benefit a ton from this, so usually I skip over this, but if you want to take it, you definitely could. And that's pretty much all there is for the Vanguard Prestige perk options. So that covers pretty much everything you need to know about the Vanguard class to have an easier time with him in Space Marine 2. Despite his flaws, this class can still be very fun to play, even when he's shouting magazine out and magazine in the entire time. And hopefully this guide helped you, and if you want more build guides for this class and others, you can find all of those on this channel, alongside other Space Marine 2 guides and discussions. And if you want to catch me live to ask me questions about the game, you can find me here on YouTube or Twitch with a link in the video description alongside a link to my community Discord. I also want to say a special thank you to my channel members, since your support helps keep the channel alive and lets me make content like this. And as always, thank you for watching, take it easy, bye.